Welcome back to the Mad About It podcast, Learning Literature with Madison. If you're familiar with me, it's probably from my AP Banned Book series on TikTok, where I explain biographical information about a banned book and its author, give a refresher summary, and analyze the book like mad. The Mad About It podcast is basically a longer version of that, but now we're open to analyzing any book. And boy, do we have a highly controversial, highly hilarious, highly not hilarious book for today. I am talking about Stephanie Meyer's Twilight. And who better to talk about a vampire werewolf love triangle book with than your mom, who's paying for a degree for you to be able to analyze said vampire werewolf love triangle book. Say hi, Mom.
Hi, Mom.
Okay. But we watched all of the movies.
Love them.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of people, it's very similar. A lot of people only watch the movies because the books, I personally like them better, but, I get the appeal of the movies because they're so camp.
Totally. And it was very much in your face to watch them, go see them, take a friend. So, yeah. Dove all in.
It's you're right. It is a fun experience to laugh with friends rather than when you're reading it, you're kind of it's like The Office. You're just staring at the camera when something weird happens.
Exactly.
So what are your thoughts on the movies?
Totally camp. Yeah. You were absolutely right about that. I couldn't even believe it. When we were watching some of the scenes, I was just like, what the heck is this? But it added to it and sort of gave, even though it was serious context, was definitely laugh out loud stuff. So it was really fun. Really fun, engaging, and I know this is weird, but I want them to make more. So
there's rumors that they're gonna make a show.
Yeah, but didn't you say it's animated or something?
No, that's a different one. That's ACOTAR.
Awesome. Well, then I'm all in.
You've not even read ACOTAR.
No, not that.
Oh, but I think it'll be interesting because there's a lot of stuff missing from the books that at least in the first book, it makes sense why Bella and Edward like each other. Because in the movies, low-key, they're just both hot. So, that's kind of the only reason, and everyone else looks like someone from 2010.
Exactly. Exactly.
Except for the two of them. But, the Twilight franchise has been talked to death. It's good, it's bad, it's camp, it's fundamentally dangerous to impressionable youth learning what romance is.
Exactly.
But what I want to focus on is Twilight's connection to classic books, which sounds like a very... your face, which sounds like a statement that doesn't go together, but it does, because that was actually Stephanie Meyer's intention. She talks about how each book is a different classic book, and she's pretty in your face about it, because Bella is reading the book that Twilight book is based off of in the book. I think the only movies they do that in is New Moon, because they're watching Romeo and Juliet in class.
Yep.
And Breaking Dawn, I don't remember if it's part 1. I think it's part 2, where Alice writes the note on the copy of The Merchant of Venice by Shakespeare. The other two, though, it's very ingrained in the book. But before we get into this, let's address the elephant in the room. Stephanie Meyer's depiction of indigenous people, specifically the Quileute tribe. If you didn't know, they are an actual real-life tribe in La Push, Washington, with lores and legends similar to what Meyer wrote in her book, but totally warped to fit her narrative. It has not been reported she has given them any money, despite making billions in book sales, movie sales, and selling merch about their tribe. Yeah, I know. Not to mention her depiction of Jacob as the aggressive man of color who is here to take the white lady away from the white man is a harmful stereotype. If you want to directly help the Quileute tribe, please consider donating to their move to higher ground. In the summer of 2022, they successfully relocated their tribal school with help from people like you, but they are still looking to move critical facilities related to housing, human services, elder services, cultural and natural resources, and essential tribal government operations out of the tsunami zone. If you can, please consider donating. Now, to move on to the comparison of classic books to Twilight, you're probably still thinking I'm crazy. But no. Here is a quote from Stephanie Meyer's website. In this section on her website, she's talking about how the book came to be. Do you know anything about that?
She had a dream.
Yes.
Yeah, she had a dream, and that's sort of how this was birthed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it's it's kind of crazy because authors will tell you, like, not only is the writing process long, but the querying process to actual publication can take like years. From her writing it to it getting accepted and published, guess how long?
Well, if you're saying it like that, then I'm assuming it's short. 3 months?
6 months.
Jeez.
Can you imagine?
No.
6 months. And you have, like, I think she signed with Little Brown, which is a pretty big publisher.
Okay.
And then immediately following, she gets a movie deal. Well, actually, fun fact about her deal with Little Brown, it was a 3-book deal, which is crazy because you're not getting accepted to just write one book and then, like, fingers crossed they take the others. No, you're set. They're going to give you more.
So did she have the entire story written out then and then just break it out into books? I mean, how do you sign on for a several book deal if you've only dreamt up this one story?
Well, so no, she didn't have more. But she said that, like, constantly Edward and Bella were, like, talking to her in her head, which, like, as a writer, I totally understand.
Sure.
But it seems like, from what she's saying, that she only had book 1.
Wow.
And they were like, and that's not uncommon for publishers to do and be like, this has serious potential. Like, we'll sign you on for a 3-book deal.
Okay.
Especially if the book doesn't end with, like, either of the characters dying.
Exactly.
But in this section, she talks about when she's, like, coming up with the ideas and stuff like that, she talks about naming the characters. In quote, she says, "It took me a while to find names for my anonymous duo, because in her drafts, she just referred to them as he and she, I guess just to, like, get it out."
Mm-hmm.
She says, quote, "For my vampire, parentheses, who I was in love with from day one." Keep in mind, he's 17, but whatever. She had kids at this point, Stephanie Meyer.
And a husband?
I assume so. She's highly Mormon, which we'll talk about later.
Got it.
But she says, "I decided to use a name that had once been considered romantic, but had fallen out of popularity for decades. Charlotte Bronte's Mr. Rochester and Jane Austen's Mr. Ferris were the characters that led me to the name Edward. I tried it on for size and found that it fit well. My female lead was harder. Nothing I named her seemed just right. After spending so much time with her, I loved her like a daughter, and no name was good enough. Finally, inspired by that love, I gave her the name I was saving for my daughter, who had never shown up and was unlikely to put in an appearance at this point. Isabella."
That's so sweet. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
That's sweet.
Yeah. Hold on to that sentiment.
Okay, I will.
So here, obviously, we get her first mention of classic books. She's talking about Charlotte Bronte's Gothic novel, Jane Eyre, which came out in 1847, and then Jane Austen's Mr. Ferris, who is in Sense and Sensibility. So, to me, this is a crazy name to pull for Edward. Because have you read Jane Eyre?
Long time ago.
So, Jane Eyre, I love Jane Eyre. I love the book. I think it's incredibly well written. But as Virginia Woolf said, you don't read the book for the characters or the plot, but because it's well written. Because the characters are absolutely insane. Mr. Edward Rochester is the most horrible person and romantic partner ever. If you're unfamiliar, Jane Eyre, the protagonist, our main protagonist, is 18 years old. Mom, guess how old Mr. Rochester is?
Isn't he in his 30s?
He is 40!
Ew, Rhodey.
Mom, I'm 19. Would you let me marry
No, that's so gross. No.
And, more specifically, would you let me marry a 40-year-old who says stuff like this? He says, quote, "Jane, will you hear reason? Because if you won't, I'll try violence." Yeah.
No.
And then Jane thinks to herself and responds to this, quote, "A moment, a moment of repulsion, flight, fear would have sealed my doom and his." She is saying that, like, if she responds poorly in any way, he's probably going to kill himself and her.
Charming.
Very much. And this is, like, really similar to Edward in Twilight, he talks a lot about wanting to kill himself.
Yeah, but not her.
Yeah.
Never her.
No. What I'm talking about is him saying in, like, New Moon, he can't live without her. And we see Bella, like, is in the same place. Like,
oh, yeah.
She, in the books, because we don't really get that monologue from her in the movie, in the book, she says the only reason she doesn't is because of Charlie. And that's so sad, because you have nothing else but Charlie. And it's not even like, it's like a sense of obligation. Rather, like, she doesn't want to hurt him. And it's just like, you have nothing else?
Yeah.
It's so sad. But Rochester also plays these horrible tricks on Jane. He gaslights her, etc., all to see if she truly loves him. And Edward does something very similar, even if not intentionally. He is 17 mentally, but he plays these weird mind games with Bella to see if she would truly love a monster. And Rochester thinks he's a monster too because, you know, he locked his wife in an attic.
Exactly. I was waiting for that to be brought up.
But even though Meyer says that her name for Bella was inspired by a name for her daughter, it's really easy to see Bella as Jane. She's far younger than Rochester, 18 to his 40-year-old, and then Bella is obviously like 17 to Edward being 109.
Exactly.
And she simply does not care about her well-being. Similar to Bella and Edward in that scene in the forest in the first movie, where he's like, I thought about killing you, and she's like, but you won't. Like, Jane does the same thing. Like, Mr. Rochester is described as like pinching her or tweaking her ear.
Right.
In addition to all this emotional abuse, and Jane's like, this is fine.
Well, and it just makes her fawn over him even more.
It's just
a little disturbing.
It is really disturbing. Now, Mom, did you know that a lot of people accuse Stephanie Meyer of Bella being her self-insert?
No,
I
didn't hear that.
Do you know what a self-insert is?
No, I don't.
Okay, so a self-insert is like a character that a writer bases off of themselves.
That'd be a stretch, no?
Well, some people, like some authors have admitted to being like, this character is me. And like they're living vicariously through this character.
Oh, well, that makes more sense.
But I personally don't like this interpretation. Even if like, because Stephanie Meyer makes it clear that like Bella is not her. If anything, she felt like she was a daughter to her.
Right.
But this interpretation ties into a long literary history of women only being thought of as being capable of writing personal diaries or for other women in like women's magazines. I mean, we're talking about Jane Eyre. Charlotte Bronte published Jane Eyre under the name Currer Bell to avoid this generalization.
Right.
And I mean, if you look up any children's books like Percy Jackson with a male protagonist, they're for boys and girls. But if you have a book like Dork Diaries with a solely female protagonist, it's only for girls. And to me, that really says what men have to say is applicable to everyone, but what women have to say is only applicable to other women.
Yep, sounds about right.
And like, yeah, Stephanie Meyer, I mean, obviously I don't know her, but a lot of the content in the book can be seen as damaging to young people. A lot of these red flags, perpetuating stereotypes, etc. I don't think that justifies, you know, calling her Bella herself, because I think it does contribute to that narrative.
Interesting. I mean, one thing that sort of bothered me about Twilight, especially watching it with you, thankfully when we watched it you were older and not like 13 or 14 and impressionable, thinking that, hey, if I put myself in harm's way, maybe the boy that I like will actually pay attention to me. Mm-hmm. Just not a responsible way. I mean, it makes for a great story, but not really a responsible way for your younger female audiences.
What do you think of, because people are like, well, books can be entertainment, but books are also a way to teach people. And I think since Twilight is aimed at those like teenagers,
exactly,
you do have to take care to...
You do hold a responsibility to your audience
mm-hmm.
and their well-being.
If this was a book for adults, I would say, whatever, girl. Like...
Exactly.
Like, it's like, okay, hopefully these adults have a fully formed frontal cortex.
Exactly.
And can recognize this is bad. And just escapism, like we were doing. We were being like, this is so camp.
Exactly. Like you were laughing more at it.
Mm-hmm. But as much of a comparison you can draw to the dynamic between Jane Eyre and Mr. Rochester in Twilight, the book Twilight is actually based off of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which is hard to gather because, if anything, Bella is obviously more like Jane than she's like Elizabeth Bennet. So where do I get this comparison? Well, first, like I said, Meyer is not shy about acknowledging the comparison. Whatever book Bella is reading in that book, you can see a very similar plot structure in the events unfolding in that Twilight book. For example, in the first book, Bella and Edward both start off not liking each other, similar to Lizzie and Mr. Darcy, but they can't seem to pull away from each other. They keep encountering one another. Edward is also really rich, like Mr. Darcy, and they both have to overcome their quote-unquote prejudice about one another. Will a human accept a vampire, and vice versa? And will they stop with their pride and like upholding these beliefs?
Mm-hmm.
I personally think this is the best, like, very loose comparison in the Twilight series because it's not super in your face. Like, you could tell it's just very, very light. What do you think of the Pride and Prejudice as Twilight and Twilight as Pride and Prejudice?
I think it's a great way. You could see a lot of similarities with the way that the book starts, though, with both of them. Well, actually, the movie and then the book. Most love stories typically start off as sort of hatred or disdain as the pheromones circle in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And both of those seem to have that as their anchoring point in the beginning from which everything else grows.
Yeah. I think I agree with you. It's kind of crazy because Stephanie Meyer is an English major. Like, she has her degree in literature. So you would expect her to have like a serious understanding of the book she's talking about. But I really feel like she kind of missed the mark with the Pride and Prejudice comparison because, like, there's so much more growth between Lizzie and Mr. Darcy separately before they're like, okay, we can be together now. Where, like, Bella and Edward so quickly become dependent on one another for any sort of growth. Like, they'll hold back. They'll hold themselves back if it means like they have to wait up for the other one to mature a little bit.
But do you think that Pride and Prejudice is much more, the depth is more firmly based in the seriousness of the story? Because Twilight is way more superficial, and that's part of the enjoyment of it, is that it doesn't get serious in the same complicated way that Pride and Prejudice does. So, I mean, she's clever to be able to draw that comparison, trying to anchor it in something serious like that, knowing that there is that camp effect with Twilight. But part of the joy and why it's so digestible and it's just an easy watch is that it's seriously superficial.
I agree with you. My only thing is I wonder if Stephanie Meyer intended for it to be superficial. I wonder if she genuinely thought it was deep.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because to me, the way she talks about it on her blog and stuff like that, I'm like, she loves these characters. And I really think, like, as an author myself, like, you don't strive to make anything superficial just because it's romance. Like, even if what the characters are learning is a very simple thing, there's a lot of thought and intention behind it.
Sure.
And I kind of want to push back a little bit on Pride and Prejudice being serious because, well, I think Jane Austen is super clever in how she calls out the upper class society, and that's really deep. Jane Austen is known for being super funny. Like,
interesting.
Yeah. And I think some of the movie interpretations kind of miss that, or it takes a little bit, but, like, do you remember? Because we watched Emma together.
Yes.
You remember the bit about her father and the draft, and he can always feel the draft?
Yes.
it's humor like that. It's very like dry and like you kind of have to get it. If you get
Yes.
it, you get it.
Yep.
And I think that works a little bit better because like Twilight, it's kind of like it's the difference between like laughing with someone, like you're laughing with Jane Austen because she intended it to be funny, and like laughing at it,
At them. Yeah.
where like I don't know if Stephanie Meyer intended us to burst out laughing every time someone takes their shirt off.
Exactly.
But as like I said, I don't think this, like you said, I think it's a good anchor for the book and the plot structure because it's like a tried and true thing. Everyone loves it. I think where things get really sticky though is starts in the second book because it becomes so blatantly clear that Bella does not understand the book she is reading. And it's not very focused on in the movies, but Bella loves to read. Like we see her reading a bit in the movies, but she goes on and on about how she's reread a lot of the books she's already read, like she's being assigned
Yep.
for.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think in the movie Alice says, "Don't you have Romeo and Juliet memorized?"
Right.
But she misses the most basic points of literally every single book she talks about. So in the second book, in New Moon, it's based off of Romeo and Juliet, and we start the book with her reading Romeo and Juliet. It's a quote, isn't it? There's a quote at the beginning of the book. These violent delights have violent ends.
Yes.
Um, and after her and Edward break up, Bella starts thinking about the hypothetical situation in which Romeo breaks up with Juliet. Why? I don't know. But she says Juliet, quote, would never be able to move on. Every time she closes her eyes, she'll see his face, even when she turns old and gray, and she'll just accept this. I think this is a serious misinterpretation of Romeo and Juliet because one of the main points of the play is that Romeo and Juliet are teenagers. Juliet is 13 and Romeo is at most 16. They would have gotten over it, even if they shouldn't have, even if it's like, that's not fair, their families were pulling them apart, whatever. The point is, like, they shouldn't have killed themselves.
Right.
You shouldn't have driven them to do this thing. But, like, they're teenagers, they're impressionable, they're gonna, like, subscribe to your vitriol. They're gonna do whatever they can.
Mm-hmm.
So Bella's saying this is so, like, girl, what?
Exactly. That seems to be the whole mood, though, of Twilight. Just that extremist approach to love, to relationships. Everything is extreme.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also, you know, how teenagers feel. Everything is extreme.
Mm-hmm.
So it mirrors.
Yeah. And I think it's good to, like, acknowledge that and, like, respect it. I mean, I'm only 19. I wasn't 17 too long ago. And
Right. Things are big. Things feel big.
Yeah. I think the problem comes in where she is in, like, a seriously toxic relationship. Like, and she gets so, like, it's so...
With Edward?
Yes.
Okay.
He talks about killing her mom.
Oh, well, yes. Yes, of course. There's that.
And he seriously manipulates her in, like, New Moon, where he's like, I lied to you and you believe me so easily.
Yeah,
Like,
I know.
girl, what?
I know. I remember that. Yeah, she keeps coming back.
Especially, like, if some guy ever said to me, you're like my own personal brand of heroin, I'm leaving. I'm leaving.
Some people would find that endearing.
To be a drug addict?
Well, they could think like, wow, he loves me that much.
But the thing about drugs, though, is they're not good for you.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, when you have somebody who has never felt like this before, to have those kind of emotions being mirrored right back to you, it becomes sometimes appealing, I think.
I think that's a really good empathetic approach, Mom.
Well, thanks, babe.
And I know a lot of people don't really treat Bella with that because they think she's stupid. And you know what? Maybe she is, but it's okay to be stupid at 17 until you're about to die. Then maybe we gotta pull it together.
Exactly. Then I think we need to check things and give it a once over.
And it's really sad because you're imparting this great wisdom because you're a great mom, but it's focused on a lot more in the books. But Bella's mom is horrible. Like, Bella talks about a lot how she did the majority of the cooking and cleaning at 8 years old because her mom was just so la la la, like flighty. She calls her mom harebrained, like whatever. It's super sad to see her have to be the mom in some ways. But like obviously she's a child, like she doesn't really have the emotional intelligence. And then she moves in with her father, who is a good father, but is very like similar to her. He doesn't really know how to deal with a teenage girl.
Well, he hasn't had to raise her.
Yeah.
So but I mean, even with her mom, it just from the movie, I have not read the book, but from what I've seen with the movie, the mom is following the boyfriend with his career, his baseball career, being supportive and all of that. And then there's Bella, who's sort of not an afterthought, but definitely not the priority. So when you're talk about modeling, when you're seeing that and you're 17, you think that that's the norm. That's what you do. So when you have these feelings and emotions and, love conquers all. So gotta cut her a little bit of slack.
Yeah. And that's a really good point. And it's a super sad point because she's mirroring what her mom is doing.
Exactly.
She's following Edward wherever he goes. And she talks about how, I remember New Moon when Edward's like, my family's leaving. And she's like, okay, we'll find something to tell Charlie. She's like fully ready to leave.
Exactly. She's all in to abandon her father, which I couldn't even believe.
Their relationship makes me really sad because in the books, it's also in the movie, he puts snow tires on her truck.
Yep.
Or like snow chain tracks, whatever.
Yes.
And she's like, oh, thank you. In the book, she almost starts crying because she has never had someone take care of her before. And it's always been her. She takes care of her mom.
Yeah, but you know what I wish, and this is what I wish for like all women, honestly, not to veer off topic, but just that they find themselves before looking to find themselves who they are in a relationship with somebody else, because the two are different. They're very different. So when you have Bella that basically went from taking care of her mom, supporting everything in the house, and not having that time to find out who she is, independent of your mom, your dad, your boyfriend, your whoever, that experience just transcends everything else. Where when she goes and she marries Edward and then they spoiler alert have their baby and everything, and then she turns into a vampire and says, I finally feel alive. It makes me so sad because that same feeling was available before her relationship with Edward. She had that opportunity to feel that. And basically she's taken on his life and feeling fulfilled in his life, but not her own.
It's really sad. And because like you see the potential in her to that she can recognize these bad things. She calls Edward at one point, quote, my fickle Romeo, because Romeo is fickle. Yeah. He's a teenager. He drops Rosalind the second he sees Juliet. That's fickle. But she projects onto the story. She doesn't learn from Romeo and Juliet that taking your life for love is not good. If your partner loves you, they'd want you to be happy and move on.
And alive.
And literally alive.
Yeah.
But like, Edward does, like, the reason in New Moon he gives you is, like, he's like, I want you to be happy, and that's why he's leaving. But, I don't know if you know this. There is a book called Midnight Sun. Have you heard of Midnight Sun?
No.
That is Stephanie Meyer's newest addition to the Twilight series, and it is Twilight from Edward's point of view. Yup. And in this book, do you remember the ending scene in the hospital where he's like, I need to leave you, Bella?
Yes.
And she's like, no, like, promise me you won't. And he says, okay, I won't. in the book, he thinks to himself that he is going to leave her, but he lies to her. Yeah.
Interesting.
That is not good to do to someone you love.
No.
But as horrible as this comparison is, I think the most egregious example is in Eclipse with Wuthering Heights. So,
tell me.
Have you read Wuthering Heights?
Mad, it has been so long. I honestly, I think it was in high school.
And hey, that's okay.
Okay, thanks.
Emily,
no judging.
Emily Bronte wrote it, and that's the sister of Charlotte Bronte. What a cool family to be in. But this, obviously, Bella is reading Wuthering Heights, and she says that Catherine, who is the female protagonist, quote, is really all the source of the trouble, not Heathcliff. This man is guilty of domestic abuse, murder, adultery, blackmail, kidnapping, grave robbing, and animal cruelty. At most, Catherine is spoiled and selfish.
Wow.
And it's crazy because Bella talks about having read this book multiple times. She talks about, we get a description of the book, and it's like weathered a bit, like it's clear she's read it multiple times. And everyone talks about, oh, you've read it so many times. Edward sees the book and he's like, I don't like that book. He says both of the characters are horrible, particularly Heathcliff. Bella says she likes it because of the inevitability that they'll end up together, that their love is their one redeeming quality. What do you think of this?
Foreshadowing.
Yeah. So Edward rereads the book to see why Bella loves it so much, and he says he starts to sympathize with Heathcliff.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it just took, like, I don't know, a few hundred years. Because now he's become Heathcliff, so maybe he's seeing the representation, the validation he needed to be a horrible person.
Oh my gosh.
But in Wuthering Heights, there's a love triangle between Catherine, Heathcliff, and Edgar, this other guy who's like a more socially acceptable person to marry, which would be Jacob, because he's not a vampire.
Exactly. He has a pulse.
But when choosing between Edward and Jacob, Bella says about herself, quote, I was selfish. I was hurtful. I tortured the ones I love. I was like Kathy, like Wuthering Heights. Only my options were much better than hers. Neither one evil, neither one weak. And it's like, okay, so you do get it. You do get that Heathcliff is a horrible person.
Exactly.
So it's just like, it's so sad, Mom, because you see she does have the capability to recognize these things are bad.
Yep.
But, like...
makes the choice for love to conquer all, though.
And it's just like, it's clear she's projecting, and she's using these stories and the fact that they are so beloved as validation for what she's actively living through.
Justification.
Yeah,
for sure.
But, like, it's just so sad, because you see these little fragments where she's like, oh my god, she's misinterpreting the book. And then you see her say, like, Heathcliff is evil.
No, she knows.
She knows.
But, like, throughout all of Twilight, people have warned her. Jacob warned her 10,000 times over. Do you know what you're doing? And she stayed steadfast on that. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I know exactly what I want.
But it's so crazy to me because I think Stephanie Meyer, because like you said, I genuinely don't think she had the rest of the series planned out, which is okay. But
she did a great job.
Yeah. She very clearly saw that by the third book, Jacob looked like the better choice. Oh, yeah. He was much healthier for her.
Yeah. But...
because in Eclipse, his character is completely different.
Oh, yeah.
He kisses Bella without her consent. She says no multiple times, and he does it anyway.
Exactly.
And he's just so aggressive.
He's a jerk.
And it's just like, that was not the character in New Moon at all.
No.
Like, he very much was like, if anything, just a little naive and very much, because he's like 16. He's younger than Bella. He's like, I'll wait for you, which is like not the best thing to say because it's kind of like pressuring her. But he's 16. Like, he's a little boy, and he sees that she's...
a pass.
Yeah. He sees she's super depressed. Like, I could see a 16-year-old thinking this is the right thing to say, that he's being patient. But, like, then he turns into this awful person.
Yeah.
And I think Stephanie Meyer had to character assassinate him in order for Edward and Bella to make sense. Because it's like, at that point, who else is Bella going to get with?
Exactly. It could have gone either way.
And it's just, I think it frames it as, if we're talking about the inevitability, which Bella loves so much, is like, she found her first love. There's no one else. This is the only person in the story. There's a set amount of characters, and this is the only one I want.
She imprinted.
That's a good point.
Thanks.
She imprinted. That's another character assassination. Why does Jacob have a crush on a baby?
Gross. So gross.
It really is sad because she can't see beyond her teenage years, which is, it makes sense as a teenager. You really think like, this is the end of the world.
Exactly.
But like a really great point would have been like in Pride and Prejudice, which is a book Bella claims, Stephanie Meyer claims to know very well, is Lizzie Bennet refuses to settle. Mr. Darcy proposes to her and she says no.
Exactly.
You aren't the person I need. You need to be a better person. And she goes on about her business and he gets it together and then she's like, fine.
Yep.
The fourth book, Breaking Dawn, not part 1 and part 2. It's one complete book. They split it up because vibes. Is based on The Merchant of Venice. And I don't find this comparison particularly interesting. Like, I don't find Breaking Dawn particularly interesting. It's weird. Why does Jacob have a crush on a baby? Oh my god, Bella and Edward end up together. I'm shocked. Anyway, just to scratch that itch in your brain, here's a quote from Schmoop talking about the comparison. And this is a quote from Schmoop quoting Stephanie Meyer. I'm not the kind of person who writes a Hamlet ending. If the fight happened, like the fight with the Volturi, it would have ended with 90% of the combatants, Cullen and Volturi alike, destroyed. Because I would never finish Bella's story on such a downer. Everybody dies. I knew that the real battle would be mental. It was a game of maneuvering. Alice tore a page from The Merchant of Venice because the end of Breaking Dawn was going to be somewhat similar. Bloodshed appears inevitable, doom approaches, and then the material is reversed and the game is won by some clever verbal strategies. No blood is shed, and the romantic pairings all end happily ever after. This is because in The Merchant of Venice, it's a Shakespearean comedy about two Venetian merchants, Antonio and Bassanio. The Italians are going to come for me because I can't say it. And they get caught up in this like weird business deal with like Shylock, and Antonio can't pay, and he promises he'll give him a pound of flesh in case he wouldn't be able to repay it, and then he can't repay it, and then Shylock takes him to court, and like Shylock's gonna kill him or whatever. But then this woman, Portia, saves the day because she's an heiress who has fallen in love with Bassanio. She disguises herself as a lawyer to plead for Antonio's defense before Shylock in court. In a few strategic verbal moves, Portia not only gets Shylock to forfeit everything he owns, but to beg for his life. Shylock leaves defeated, just like Arrow and his whole army do at the end of Breaking Dawn. And also, Portia is very similar to, like, Alice, as, like, she's doing this, like, weird verbal maneuver. So that's the comparison there, which doesn't really give a lot to the Bella and Edward dynamic that is the main focus, because they would have to be Antonio and Bassanio, who are just two pals.
Exactly.
Because honestly, by Breaking Dawn, like their story is like they're gonna get together. Yeah. They're gonna get married. They're gonna have a baby. So I actually posted a TikTok talking about this, obviously a lot more briefly. I think the video is only like 2 minutes as opposed to this podcast being a bit longer. And I wanted to read you some of the comments and see your opinion.
Okay.
Because I'm talking about something very similar and I want to see a response to what people think.
Sure.
One of the comments says, she has about as much literature literacy, bit of a double there, as the average 17-year-old. So her not knowing what she's talking about makes sense. Do you agree with this?
Are you talking about Bella?
Yeah.
No, I don't agree with that. I think she's deceiving. Again, I mean, just because people are not out loud and proud with all of their literature knowledge doesn't mean that they're stupid or incomplete or immature or whatever.
I think that's a really, you're so nice, Mom.
Thanks, babe. Thanks. I try.
Because I read this comment and I was like, as someone who was 17 and was reading these books, no, not, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I did not think any of these things. And no one in my class thought any of these things because we all had to talk about it. And the teacher made sure we weren't thinking that Romeo and Juliet was a happy ending.
Or a good idea.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We very much were not pushed that way. And I don't know, like as a 17-year-old who was in like a really serious relationship, never once was I reading Jane Eyre and being like, yeah, that's good.
Let's do this.
Yeah, like this is what I want. So I think that that's kind of underestimating the average 17-year-old because I don't think Bella's stupid. I think she's misinterpreting these books because she's in that space, and if she had to acknowledge it, it would tear everything up.
Exactly. Don't underestimate people, folks, especially the 17-year-old.
Yeah, of course. Being 17 is hard. A lot of people also commented that a character in a book can't be any more literate than the author who wrote them. What do you think of that? Because Stephanie Meyer is a literature major. Like, she has a degree, and a lot of people were like, imagine reading this book. Imagine reading those books as a Mormon. Or like, maybe these characters already kissed. They already hooked up. You gotta get married. Like, right. That inevitability. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, I don't think that there should be any rules, anything on character development, who's smarter, less than, whatever, because then it limits the book. It limits the plot. It limits the development. Just be free, people. Stop judging.
I really like that. Someone said Bella is Heathcliff.
What?
I think that's a bit of a stretch. I really do not think Bella is to blame for a lot of this. Maybe her
existence. She got blamed for her scent. The girl is just trying to live.
And you know what, Mom, you bring up a really good point, because I was reading Drew Afawalo's book, Loud. Highly recommend reading it if you haven't. And she talks about how much emotional labor women take on daily and are trained to take on. They take on, if there's a fault in their relationship, they immediately think, what did I do?
Exactly.
And we see Bella react to that, like the paper cut, and like she's so mad at herself that she has blood. Exactly. She has something she needs to function.
Exactly.
And her only decision is to like, okay, this person doesn't want me to exist in my most healthy self. I need to be my most unhealthy self and be a vampire.
Right.
And it's so sad.
Yeah, but it's so relevant to now, just women being made to be their smallest form, their most unassuming, quietest form. And it still resonates.
Just to wrap, I have 2 more questions for you.
Go for it.
These are more silly little questions.
Oh, okay.
Because one of the comments I got, and I get on a lot of my TikToks, why are you getting so bent out of shape over fictional characters? And like, your reaction is crazy. Obviously, I have very strong opinions about literature as tools for empathy, our way of understanding. After this whole discussion about Twilight and Bella very clearly learning wrong from the book she's reading, what do you have to say to people who think we get a little too bent out of shape over fictional characters or fictional stories?
You know what? Fictional characters have a way, these stories have a way of playing out in real life examples on the daily. We just talked about Bella and how, women are being asked to be smaller, and Bella's fawning love and apologizing for having a pulse is just one great example. Typically, and I'm very sorry, I know people are going to hate on this, it's usually men that are having these gripes, saying, you're getting bent out of shape over these characters and stuff like that. Well, they might not be in a marginalized class where a character is representing on a narrative that we have to deal with every day.
Mm-hmm.
So, usually when people are seeing somebody overreact about something, it could be a fictitious character or not. It's because the other person lacks the empathy, the awareness of what it's like to actually be in those shoes in real life. Yeah.
That's such a great point, because I feel like if we're talking about men specifically, they have such a range of characters to feel represented by.
Sure.
Or to feel seen by. And they have so many stories where they're constantly the hero, they get the love interest, they're never in the wrong.
They're complex.
And then, I'm not saying Twilight is the only story we have, but like, it's adding to a canon that Stephanie Meyer herself points out is problematic. Like, it's adding to Wuthering Heights, it's adding to Jane Eyre, and while I love both of these books and I think they're very well written, I think the way in which we frame it, in which we talk about it, is important in order to not have people like Bella misinterpret it and see it as a guidebook rather than a cautionary tale.
Something to learn from, yeah.
So that's why I get bent out of shape.
Absolutely.
Because
absolutely.
I'm never going to argue that we shouldn't read books, we should ban books, we should censor books. I've said it a million times. Censoring knowledge sets a horrible precedent. That anything, no matter what it's about, like it just sets a bad precedent.
It's manipulative is what it is.
It tells you what you can and can't read, which, crazy that conservatives are big on banning books, because that's a bit big government of you. That's a bit weird that you want to be restricted, but whatever. That's my 2 cents about why I get so worked up, and worked up is very figurative. I will stop this podcast and we will probably go watch Abbott Elementary.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'll be fine. I won't be super in dark depths about this. And I'm not saying that Twilight has terribly hurt the youth, etc., etc. I have no proof of that. However,
it's a ton of fun to watch, but what I love about your brain is your ability to make these comparisons, connections, and to take it on a deeper level, because there is that gift if people just look at it. So, and if these discussions are absolutely wonderful, and it brings about additional learning and development, which is what you're all about.
Yeah, education should be accessible without paying $1 billion.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
You know.
Preach.
You know, as the one who pays $1 billion.
Emerson. Yeah.
Call out. Emerson, please give me a bigger scholarship. Thank you. And you know what? If you don't want to get bent out of shape about a character, that's fine. You can just watch Twilight and have fun. That's what me and my mom did. But I love analyzing stuff. I'm mad about it. Wink, wink. You don't have to, but I do think it is beneficial to being a contributing member to society, and also like fostering good relationships. Like, it's crazy to say, but maybe, yeah, you read Twilight and you're like, dang, what Edward did was manipulative, even if you don't necessarily recognize it at the time. Or, hey, what Bella did was she was conceding to what someone else wanted her to do, and I don't want to live like that.
Or maybe I have a friend and I don't want them to live like that.
Exactly. And it might seem weird to be like, I'm learning from Twilight, but that's the point of books. You're supposed to, you can simultaneously, you have the brain capacity, I promise you, to enjoy something for entertainment and to also learn from it.
Exactly.
And I'm living proof, because I've probably seen Twilight like 10 times.
Literally.
But to wrap it all up, Mom, I have a silly little question for you.
Oh boy.
So, we know of Team Edward, we know of Team Jacob.
Yes.
And I've asked you this before. and you said you were Team Edward.
Yes.
That still stands?
Yeah, I just can't get with the whole Jacob vibe. I just can't. The broody, every 2 seconds I'm gonna rip off my shirt and go into the woods. It's just not for me.
And I agree with that. It's kind of like picking the lesser of two evils. So I'm gonna give you two characters who I argue are Bella's best options. Are you Team Alice or Team Emmett?
Oh, Alice.
Yeah.
Alice.
Yeah.
But wait, who's Edward's dad?
Carlisle?
I'd like Carlisle. Thank you very much. I will take Carlisle.
Okay, you could have Carlisle. I'm talking about Bella.
Oh, Alice.
Yeah.
I would love Alice for her.
I think I agree. I think Alice would be... Alice is so loyal to her.
And she's kind and tender and supportive and fun and yeah.
And you know what?
All of it.
I really like how she pushes Bella outside of her boundaries, because we were watching New Moon and Bella could not get off of her high horse and just say thank you for her birthday party.
Yeah.
And it was so sad because, like, in New Moon, like, Edward's like, can you please enjoy it? Like, my family hasn't been able to celebrate a birthday since 1930.
Oh.
Like, they really went all out. Like, let's just celebrate you. And she's like, fine, just no presents. I'm like, girl, for, like...
Seriously.
Like, your boyfriend's whole family, who you've been dating for, what, like 6 months, wants to throw you a big party? That's so special.
So special.
And you know what? Alice really challenges her to... She gets her a new outfit. She gets her, like, a bunch of presents. And she's like, happy birthday. She's challenging Bella to enjoy life.
Exactly.
Which is not something Edward does.
No.
In comparison, I brought up Emmett because I know he's Rosalie's mate, but, like, Alice is Jasper's. And Emmett, to me, Bella says she sees him a lot as, like, a big brother.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found Emmett to be so much kinder, so much more there for Bella in a healthy way.
I definitely saw the vibe between them during, for sure.
And hey, like, honestly, I'm Team Alice too, because it's Kristen Stewart. Like,
yeah, aw.
That girl is gay.
Yeah.
So let her have Alice.
Exactly.
And let her have a happy ending.
There you go.
Not a fake happy ending.
There you go.
So, Mom, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast.
Thank you for having me, babe.
So, is there anything else you wanna say to the viewers?
Oh, well, thank you all for coming and spending some time with us. And tune in next time, because my girl, one thing she knows how to do is talk to y'all about books. So,
Aww.
Thank you.
Mom, you're so good. You should be an influencer.
Oh, enchanté. Zhuzh.
I believe the next episode, if things go according to plan, I will be talking about, drumroll, people are going to be really excited about this, because every single TikTok I talk about this book, people are like, please make a podcast. I could listen to you do an entire podcast just about this one book. I'm going to be talking about The Secret History by Donna Tartt with my BFF, Emma.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Emma loves The Secret History, and she's actually gotten into some TikTok beef in my comment section about
Emma.
I know, about The
She's
Secret
the best.
History. So that episode will be next, and yeah.
I'll tune in.
Oh, thanks, Mom.
Well, thanks.
Thank you all for watching or listening, because
That
you can't see me, but we'll see you next time on Mad About It, Learning Literature with Madison. Bye.
Bye.